What are your roommate horror stories? My old roommate was dating a good friend of mine. One day, after her spending the night, they went out for lunch. His dog came out of his room with a tissue in her mouth. I stopped her, grabbed it and went to throw it out when my hand felt really wet. It was a condom, fully loaded. And when I grabbed it, I guess I squeezed it because my hand was now covered in my roommate's cum. It's been years and I still haven't told him about it. My roommate was from Appalachia, West Virginia. Gets drunk and catches a mess of squirrels, brings them inside the apartment house. They are all in the same damn cage. When he opens it up to clean one before cooking it, they all shoot out and run off. Dude stumbles around trying to catch them all again, knocking shit over. I am the horror story. When I drink equals I cook, that is why we have rules and a fire extinguisher now. Yes. Drunk cooking is the best. I get a nice buzz going and then proceed to make pizza from scratch, homemade dough, mozzarella, and an awesome pizza sauce. Trying to keep track of the several tasks going on when I'm hopelessly unable to think is so fun. Not so much a nightmare roommate, but I had a ridiculously sheltered and possibly OCD freshman year roommate. In our dorm, the most popular layout of furniture to maximize the space in the room without bunking the beds was putting them in an L shape so that one was against the wall with a window, leaving a nice area of open space to hang out in the center of the room. Her mother decided we were not allowed to do this because one of us might roll over in our sleep and fall out the window to our demise 10 floors below. Mind you, the window was 2 feet above the level of the bed and bolted shut. Every night before we went to sleep, Roomy would lock the door, turn the handle to the right, pull on the door 3 times, turn left, pull 3 times, turn right again and pull 3 times. Every single night. One day I had just taken out the trash and shortly after thrown out some scrap paper in the bin next to our sink. Roomy went to brush her teeth and accidentally knocked her toothbrush into said bin. Roomy proceeds to call her mother to ask whether she should wash off her toothbrush and use it or throw it away and buy a new. She and her mother discuss the topic for about 10 minutes, with Roomy describing the contents of the bin and exactly how long the toothbrush spent in there. Mom apparently then transfers the call to Roomy's dad, and the conversation repeats. After discussing the matter at length, it was decided that Roomy should buy a new toothbrush. Nice girl. Felt bad for her. Hope she was able to branch out a bit. Had a roommate freshman year in a shared room who was training for a bodybuilding competition. He would wake up at 5, make a ton of noise, go for a run, come back at 6, go to the gym, come back and pose in front of the mirror, sometimes in the nude, all while I was clearly awake. He would also go to bed at 8 PM and get pissed if any noise was made. The clicking of the keys on my phone once set him off because he needed beauty rest. I used to live with 3 other girls. I got along with one of them really well, but the other 2 were casual friends at best. I know most people like to say that they are the one who does the dishes the most, but generally it was me that took care of it. I did them about twice a week because they just piled up every couple of days and nobody would touch them. No big deal. I figured that everybody has different rates for when they want to do dishes. And if my roommates only wanted them washed once a week or so, then I was the odd man out for wanting them cleaned twice a week. So I usually just ended up doing it myself. I didn't mind. We had a lot of other little conflicts over the semester, but I always kind of prided ourselves on the fact that we never had a quarrel about dishes. Fast forward a year. I'm living with some new roommates who were friends with the old ones. I'm telling them about the dishes, and how I felt that if somebody in the apartment wants a certain chore to be done a certain way, they should do it themselves and not expect everyone else to cater to their need if nobody else cares about it. One of them gets a weird look on their face and I ask what's up. She says those girls said you never did the dishes. They said you let them sit in the sink for 3 days without cleaning them. Turns out that the girls in the apartment really wanted the dishes done every day, but they were too passive aggressive to actually talk to each other about it. So they just let them sit in the sink for 3 days until somebody cracked and did them as punishment. It was absurd. You're a 20-year-old woman and you can't talk to your roommates about some dishes. One night, as some of us sat downstairs enjoying mushrooms, we had one of those fabled shared illusions that our ceiling was exploding and bulging. Then a foot appeared through it, followed by roommate's face. He cursed. Then another roommate's face appeared, and he cheered. It turned out they had argued over which downstairs room or bedroom was above, so they ripped up a floorboard and kicked the ceiling through. I've posted this before, but my first roommates invaded my privacy by stealth installing screen viewer software on my desktop and cyber stalking me. They would do shit like ban my MAC address from the router, which belonged to me, type while I was trying to do homework assignments on my computer, harass me by typing expletives, putting a hard drive in my computer and cloning my main drive onto it, and out me to other roommates and online friends to a certain fandom I was part of at the time. I genuinely believed I was being targeted by an online hacker. I was just a naive, sheltered child with social anxiety. It wasn't until the only decent roommate I had opened up to me and told me what was going on. There were other things, like threats of ganging up on me, and sheet like saran wrap on the toilet seat and peanut butter in my shoes. Freshman year of college I got stuck with a smelly, antisocial dude who would call his mom on the landline. This was on the cusp of the cell phone explosion in our room and complain about his classes and professors in the whiniest tone for about 2 hours every single night. He never once hung out with us despite our encouragement, and by the second month in we stopped talking completely. I wonder how he's doing. 4 of us lived in a 4-bedroom house. My roommate had a pretty serious girlfriend who was over all the time. One day she came up to me and asked if I was alright with splitting rent 5 ways instead of 4. Of course I am. She then asked the other 2 roommates the same thing. Yes answers all around. Finally she approached her boyfriend to ask if she could move in with us since all of his roommates already said it was alright. Wait. What was that? She hadn't asked him about it yet. My first semester in college I had a roommate who was a spoiled brat. She didn't know how to use a washing machine. She had so much sheet that my stuff was just this little blob of blue and a sea of pink. She was always cold, so kept the temperature up really high. She would always bring guys back to the dorm room and I'd have to hang out in the common room. I finally got fed up with that. She brought a guy back and tried getting up to something. She kept giving me looks and I just ignored her. He finally left and she was like, "Why didn't you leave?" I told her to duck off because it was my room too. Though, she once left a guy in our dorm to go run off and do something. He was pretty cool and we watched a football game together. My roommate's boyfriend moved in with us to get back on his feet, which was supposed to be a couple weeks at the most. He kept ordering porn on our cable box, and when I told her he had to go, he refused to leave. We called the cops and they made us allow him 30 days to vacate. It was the most awkward situation. Pair this with the fact that I had to hide my food in my bedroom because my roommate would get up in the middle of the night and eat my Pop-Tarts. I'm actually the horrible, horrifying roommate. I didn't do any of this shit on purpose. But you can't actually help what you do when you're asleep. Can you? First, I snore. My roommate and I shared the same room and she eventually got used to it. It wasn't bad. But going from sleeping alone to sharing a room with someone who snores sucks. Second, I talk in my sleep. Not full sentences or anything, but enough for my roommate to hear a word or two every hour or so that she was still awake in our room. Third, I move around a lot. A lot of the time in the beginning of us sharing a room she thought I was waking up when really I was still dead asleep. This brings us to the actual horror part though. IDK how many times this happened, but it was often enough to freak my roommate out. But I would sit up in bed. But how is this horrifying, you ask? I would sit up in bed, turn my head, stare at her with my eyes so dilated that they looked black, and growl, make scary noises. Sleep talk was most likely snoring along with muttering the occasional word. That's how I was the horrifying roommate. Edit, typos. first year college I was living in an old Hungarian widow's house where she rented out 3 rooms. It was a good quiet place to study and not get distracted. So one of my fellow renters was a quiet nerdy girl who lived in the basement. She was no problem. Then there was Phil. Phil was a 500-pound bachelor in his 40s who claimed to be a professional pilot and millionaire, all while renting a room for $400. He would cook steaks the size of my head and then blame his dishes on me to the old lady who had no idea what to do about it. He'd steal my food. If my girlfriend was over, he'd masturbate and wheeze so loudly we could hear. He couldn't fit on the toilet in our tiny shared bathroom, so he would sheet in the shower and waffle stomping down the drain, leaving a horrible sheet smell and brown stains in the shower. I hated Phil. My roommate for the summer of my freshman year of college was a randomly matched one. He moved in and was kind of nice, but also not very smart and very open about his life. At one point of the semester, he was messing with the girl who lived next door by using the app Yik Yak to pretend to be her, and getting random other guys on campus to come to her room saying they had been offered sexual acts by her. He got 3 guys to do it before he finally stopped. After the rest of the floor found out how messed up this was, everyone ostracized him and made fun of him. He quickly grew tired of this. And one day there was a party in that same girl's room that he was not invited to. I wasn't either. But because I didn't really care to hang out with the rest of the floor since I was focused on the Calc 2 class I was taking, those in the party were sending him pictures and videos of them having fun, which irritated him more, up to the point where he left our room and started banging on their door to confront the people teasing him. One of the girls at the party opened the door, but wouldn't let him in to fight the other kids. He proceeded to punch her in the face and yell at the others, then came back to the room and went to bed. About 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door and I answered it. It was one of the campus police officers. So I immediately woke him up and said, "It's for you," and went back to bed. The next morning he was moving his stuff out and I never saw him again. On the bright side, since he left so early in the semester, I had a room to myself for most of the semester. Pushed the beds together to make myself one huge one and had a king-style suite. Not my story. But my neighbor had a roommate freshman year who was a total stoner. So much so that he rarely left his room. 1/2 of the school year through. He got pretty sick. Smoked more weed and left his room even less. Never went to the doctor because he was always stoned and didn't wanna get caught. He was sick for the entire 3rd and 4th quarter. Mid-4th quarter, he busts out of his room and yells, "I just sheet blood. Take me to the hospital." He went and found out his appendix burst a month ago. And he could have easily died at any second. He also had some other kind of severe virus that I can't quite remember what it was called, but also could have easily killed him had he gone any longer without a doctor. Scary to think how easy somebody can fall into something like that. I came home after work one morning to smoke barreling out of my oven. My roommate left a pizza cooking all night while passed out drunk. He lived through the smoke, but everything I owned, including all my furniture and property, reeked of putrid smoke for 3 weeks. Holy shit. Finally my time to shine. I'd been friends with this girl for about 4 years after meeting her in high school. She ended up moving 6+ hours away but always called me a few times a week. When I mentioned I was moving out of my parents' place and getting an apartment, she sprung the question and asked if I would consider a roommate. Being 21 and moderately secure with finances, I agreed. Because who wouldn't like lower rent? Well, being 6 hours away from the city I'm in, she couldn't help for sheet with applications, shopping around, and refused to do anything online because she's not a tech kind of girl. I finally found a place I liked in a great neighborhood with a great lease. I was approved, moved in, and waited for her to move in. Welp. Long story short, she didn't have a ride or U-Haul or money or anything, and neglected to mention that $6,000 she kept saying she would use to move was her mom's checking account and couldn't touch, obviously. I ended up going to bumduck nowhere to pick her up. And then she mentions in passing that she has a baby who will be coming with us. At this I'm immediately backing out. but she convinced me it would be okay. Fast forward 4 months and she hasn't paid rent once. Doesn't know the light bill is separate. Feeds her screaming gremlin about once a day if she felt like it. Always left a huge mess in my kitchen. Destroyed my plumbing trying to flush a coochie cleaner. And then meets a boyfriend and moves in with her daughter's new daddy after about a week. Now I'm down about 9 grand and stuck with an extra bedroom. But at least I got my sleep back. Never again. One of my roommates was a real slob. We got on his ass about messes in the kitchen. But there wasn't much we could do about his room. Anyways. One night we woke up to his yells, and when I opened his door a raccoon ran out of his room. Which my other roommate shot and killed. My dirty-ass roommate fell asleep with his window open and a raccoon ended up coming in and eating random sheets strewn about his room. A very sheltered roommate I had living downstairs was very open about her singing. She had no shame and talent to match. Singing Cher's Believe was one of her Saturday morning go-tos. Hey, it could be worse, right? Well, maybe. 5 AM is just too early for Cher. But what was most disturbing was her Backstreet Boys rendition of I Want It That Way. This is when things get odd. Maybe she was just trolling me, but she would belt out this tune when she got ready for bed after an evening shift. The odd thing about it was how long she would sing it for. There were nights where I would wake up at 4 AM and she was still singing. Just as bad and just as passionate. I had enough. I went downstairs to ask her to wait until morning. But it was dark. No lights at all. Even in her room it was dark. 4 AM and she's singing her heart out in bed. So I knock and the singing stops. She opens the door all confused and she barely has a voice left. The next morning I apologize for surprising her, but I couldn't sleep with all her Backstreet Boys singing. She doesn't understand what I'm talking about, but it suddenly occurred to me that she was singing in her sleep. Every night. So how could I expect her to just not sing in her sleep? Maybe she was trolling me. But for 8 months this little woman with no friends and no family close by sung Backstreet Boys in her sleep. I caught my college roommate masturbating. More than 3 times. In the first semester. He transferred. I also had a roommate who was excessively green. Meaning he would sort through our recycling and trash and then hold house meetings, explain why certain types of things were going in the wrong container. I learned a lot about recycling. But it kind of got to be too much. Also, quite a few too many roommates prefer to have their dishes soak when we have a perfectly good dishwasher. I had a horrible nightmare roommate who had no sense of smell. Her boyfriend was a creep who lived with us without my permission and they each paid 1/4 of the rent while I paid half. He also loved to leave hair in the bathroom sink. She got pet rats that stank. And they escaped and ate pooped on a bunch of my stuff when I was out of the apartment on winter break. A pretty detailed story, but hear me out. I lived in a suite with 5 other guys. So essentially 3 doubles. Our roommate who lived in the third one, who we are all boys with, was the one with the hygiene problem. He showered no more than once a month and wore the same clothes without washing for a very long time. Also, there were other things such as leaving unfinished food around the suite. The horror story was when one time his room smelled so bad. I mean like a dead pig covered in its own feces that was dropped in a sewer full of dead babies. Our drunk roommate went into our smelly roommate's stank chamber to see where he was. But he didn't find anything except for a big wave of stench that essentially nuked his nostrils. He had this disgusted face and I asked him what was wrong. And he said, "I'll be back." He went into our suite bathroom and closed the door. That moment was where I heard the most horrific sounding vomiting no mortal man should ever hear. It sounded like a volcano had sex with Niagara Falls and proceeded to explode with 1,000 bottles of whiskey. Everyone in our suite was filled with extreme disgust and laughter after those events had transpired. TLDR, roommate's room smelled so bad that it made our drunk roommate puke like Krakatoa. My roommate was a white girl from Idaho that brought several pairs of skis to school in Arizona and spent all of her time chasing after hot black guys. Her words, instead of attending class or studying. By the time the first month of school was over, she had settled into a routine of loudly having ebonics lessons via cell phone at odd hours of the night and had a full-blown stalker in one of her discarded hot black guys. She couldn't understand why she was failing the classes she wasn't attending. I'm a fairly unassuming Midwesterner. We were living in the honors dorms. It was awkward, to say the least. I was glad when she rushed into a sorority and moved out midway through the semester. The one thing that bugs me about my roommate the most is since I've lived here she has somehow adopted at least 5 of my chargers. Like mine will go missing and I keep buying replacements and sometimes hide them. Then she'll ask to borrow one again and it's suddenly hers. Where are the first 5 I bought? Where the duck are they? Does her boyfriend have a giant pile of them at his? In the 2 years I've lived here she has not bought her own charger once. And she seems to duck every charger she's ever used. It's like a never-ending cycle of me buying chargers and her adopting them. Yet I don't have the gonads to say anything about it. I just get secretly furious. Ha ha ha.